When you look at the map of Germany and France, there are a couple countries in the middle of them. If you start off with the smaller ones, the first one is Luxembourg, then you have Belgium, and then the Netherlands. Even though these three countries are tiny, but they've been around for a very long time, and its origins go back to the Holy Roman Empire, which we've made a video on. Between these three countries, Belgium is probably the most powerful one, but in the last century, because if you go further back, the Netherlands is the most powerful country. If you've seen our video about Leopold II, you realize that how ruthless he was and how he treated the people of the Congo. Leopold II was so demonic that he enslaved the entire population of the Congo. All the people belong to him, and everything they do is to get more rubber from rubber trees for his business. Leopold II enslaved an entire population for his own benefit without even feeding them properly. The scariest part is that if you were a slave in the Congo and didn't work quickly, there was a chance that you would have your arms chopped off. In the Congo, there were thousands of people that had no hands because they were chopped off by the Belgians. But this video is not about Leopold II, it's about his nephew, Albert I. Albert I's father was Prince Philip, the smaller brother of Leopold II, and he was the upcoming prince, and he was going to be king after Leopold II. But before he becomes king, he dies in the year 1905, and the up-and-coming prince is Albert I. This is the time where Leopold II is still king. Albert I was born in 1875 and went to school until he was 16. At this age, he decides to quit school so he can join the Belgian military. He went in the military and they realized that this guy knows something, so they made him lieutenant. The most interesting thing Albert I would do is that since he wasn't well known around the country of Belgium, he would just wear normal clothes around the country and visit different types of neighborhoods just to talk to people. He was very interested in the people of Belgium to see how they live like, what are their complaints, and what can be better. At this time that Albert I goes around the country asking how the people are living, is a time where most of the country is extremely poor. In a way where most people had a hard time feeding themselves, while 1% of the population lives like kings. Albert I, that was only 20 years old at this time, couldn't believe the poverty that his people are living in. Albert I tells himself, if our country is like this and our own people are living like this, how does the places we colonize live like? So that's when he decided to travel to the Congo and see how life is out there. When he sees Belgium, he's even more devastated and he can't believe that the whole country is turned into slaves. And he also realizes that the only reason that Belgium is rich and wealthy is because of the Congo. Albert I had heard of slavery in the Congo, but he didn't know it was to this extent. When he saw how the Congo is treated, he began to hate the King of Belgium, Leopold II. But he didn't want to say anything because Leopold II was still king and he didn't want any bad blood between them. Time passes and eventually Leopold II dies. And on the 17th of December 1909, Albert I becomes the third king of Belgium. You wouldn't see any resemblance of Leopold I and II in Albert I because he was completely different from these guys. His only hope was that when he becomes king, he treats the people of Belgium well. Unlike his uncle that he only worked for himself. Let's continue. Albert I becomes the king of Belgium, and this is at a time where Belgium and Germany have good relations. And another interesting fact is that Albert I's wife is a German of Bavaria, and they also have 3 children together. When you get to August 1914, World War I has began. Just like we said, the relationship between Germany and Belgium was good until then. That's why the Germans kindly asked the King of Belgium, Albert I, to give him a route to enter France. Germany and France share a border. Why would they want to enter from Belgium? Because the French always felt a threat from the Germans. So on the French-German border, there was always troops waiting just in case. And even if they wanted to fight the French at that border, they would have to pass the Rhine River, which was another major obstacle. But if they were allowed to go through Belgium, it would have been a shortcut that doesn't have many obstacles in a way, and they could easily enter France. They only had to convince Albert I to do so. The Germans were surprised, but what Albert I said, they didn't know that he would resist this type of offer. It was understandable why he said that, because he didn't want to be in between a conflict between two major powers at this time. Of course, you know the Germans, they wouldn't take no for an answer. So the German army entered Belgium. Albert I tells his men to hold off the German army, an army that was 200,000 strong. But the size of the Belgian army was much smaller than the Germans, because the Germans had 750,000 men. At this time, something happens that had not happened for many years. Back in the day, the main commander of a war was probably the king of that empire, and he was the one making the calls. It had been a long time since that happened, but in the war between Belgium and Germany, Albert I was in the front line with his own men during the battle. But even with all that, the Belgian army had nothing on the German army, even though they had a king in their battlefield. They showed their bravery, but they weren't strong in terms of strategy, equipment, and firepower. And one of the main problems was that there was a communication error between the men. You might ask, what do you mean? They did not have walkie-talkies to communicate? No, that had not been invented yet. They wouldn't understand each other's language. Take a look at the map of Belgium. The northern part is called Flanders, and they speak Flemish, which is a language similar to Dutch. On the other hand, the south of Belgium speaks French, and that means these two don't know how to communicate with one another. But nowadays, most people from Belgium either speak both languages or they can communicate in English. But this wasn't the same 100 years ago. You might say, why didn't he bring a translator? He would, but there was always a miscommunication between them. The Germans are moving forward inside Belgium, but Albert I and his men are waiting for them. The German army had itself very ready for World War I, and you could consider it the biggest threat and the most powerful army at this time. But the Belgian army strongly withholds them and makes them stand down. And that's in a way where 750,000 men from the German army couldn't move forward for 3 months. But eventually, on October 31st, 1914, the Belgian army is defeated and the Germans enter France. 90% of Belgian land is in German control, but the 10% is where Albert and his men are standing, and they're holding that place strong. Albert I also decides to destroy all the dams in the way and flood the entire area, so the Germans have a hard time moving forward. But for the Germans, Albert I didn't seem that important anymore, because they wanted France, and they attacked them. Albert I and his men completely stood in the 10% that they held for 4 years straight. We finally get to the 28th of September 1918, when the French army is finally pushing the German army back. Not only do they retreat from France, but they also retreat from Belgium. And while the Germans are retreating back to Germany, Albert I and his men take back the entire country that was taken over by Germany. After this, the people of Belgium know Albert I as a hero, and after many years, Albert I was the last king to be in the front lines of a war. When Albert I got his country back, it was completely run down and demolished by the German troops. And all he did after he took the country back is to rebuild and rebuild back better. And he continued rebuilding his country until the year 1934. In that year, Albert was only 58 years old, but he went rock climbing and he fell and killed himself. One of Albert's son, named Leopold III, becomes the new king of Belgium. 6 years passes, the German army gets itself ready once again, and without asking question, they enter Belgium to occupy France once again. But this story is very well known. Albert I is well known in Belgian history because he fought for the country in the front lines. It had been a long time since a king was in the battle, and Albert I was the last king to do so.